Herzlich willkommen. Very welcome to this evening panel of the conference Geteilte Heimaten. Tonight's discussion has been conceived by Debates on Europe. Debates on Europe is normally a series of events organized by two German institutions, namely the S. Fischer Stiftung, the S. Fischer Foundation in Berlin, and the German Academy for Language and Literature based in Darmstadt. Ever since the first event of this series was held in Budapest in 2012, Debates on Europe has been hosted in places where something is at stake, where the future is being negotiated politically, socially, or culturally. From Minsk and Kharkiv in the east to Belfast in the west, or from Narva and St. Petersburg in the north to Skopje and Athens in the south. These events have addressed the most pressing issues on the European agenda. And even if we tonight have migrated into the digital sphere, this is a topic that we will focus on for the next hour or so as well. For just as Christine Heinig, one of the key persons behind this conference, noted in her opening remarks yesterday, cohesion, social cohesion, is something that is and always will be umkämpft. It is at stake, and it's being negotiated and defended every day. It is at stake. And in some places, more than others. Tonight, we will hear about three such places: Northern Ireland, Belarus, and Hungary. And from these three places, we have three remarkable people who will tell us about the situation in these cities and countries in Europe. JAN CARSON is a writer based in Belfast. She is a community arts facilitator. Her first novel, no, not her first novel, her novel, The Firestarters, won the European Union Prize for Literature for Ireland a couple of years back. Just last month, she published The Last Resort, which is a collection of interlinked short stories set in a fictitious or fictional camping place or a caravan park. It was originally commissioned by the BBC and was broadcasted on BBC 4 for, I think, 10 consecutive Sundays in a row. We also have IRYNA VIDANAVA from Belarus, who is the co-founder and CEO of City Dog by, also BY, which is a leading independent online media in Belarus. She's an internationally acclaimed digital media expert. She's a researcher and consultant, but she's also an author of numerous publications on new media, on civil society, and on public policy in Belarus. And she's a board member of the Belarusian Association of Journalists. Thirdly, we have LÁZSLÓ FÖLDÉNYI, who many of you who are listening to this from Germany will be acquainted with. László Földényi is a cultural historian, but he's also considered one of Hungary's most prominent and renowned intellectuals. He's a member of the German Academy for Language and Literature, and last year, 2020, he won the Leipzig Award for European Understanding, the Leipziger Buchpreis zur europäischen Verständigung. This prize he was awarded for his book Lob der Melancholie, also in praise of melancholy, and he will finally be able to receive that, I hope, in just a couple of weeks in Leipzig. László Földényi is also a professor, and as such, he used to be the head or chair of the Art and Theatre, Film and Theatre Art University in Budapest. He isn't anymore, and I think that he will tell us a little bit more about that as the evening proceeds. Jan, I would like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit how it is in Belfast, where you are at the moment, and what is happening in Northern Ireland right now?
Okay, first of all, can I say a huge thank you for having me here. Greetings from Belfast, where it's finally not raining for the first time in about 10 days. I never like to assume that people know anything about Northern Ireland. We're such a tiny little country. So just to give you a brief background, you'll know about the conflict here, the 30 years of the Troubles, which came to some kind of a resolution in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement, which brought a level of peace to Northern Ireland. But whereas the world's media perhaps stopped giving us attention at that point, all of the issues that were pertinent during the Troubles didn't go away overnight. There's been a lot of kind of simmering unrest here over the last 20 years. And I guess since Brexit and the Brexit vote and the referendum, things have begun to bubble to the surface here in Northern Ireland again. And the last period of the last 6 months in particular have felt particularly tense. I always feel bad saying it feels a little tense here in Northern Ireland because it always feels tense in Northern Ireland. The other thing that we like to say a lot is it's very complicated, and it is a dreadfully, dreadfully complicated situation to explain. We have a devolved government here in Stormont, so we get to make quite a few decisions, but we always have to kind of refer to Westminster for things as well. It's a power sharing elective, so we have a DUP First Minister, so that's one of the Protestant political parties, who's backed up by a Sinn Féin Deputy First Minister, and the tension there, as you can imagine, there are two political parties that don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. So there's been quite a lot of tension over the years. Things at the minute are particularly anxious because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which the Unionist parties, the Protestant parties, do not like. The Northern Ireland Protocol came in after the Brexit kind of legislation began to play out, and the Unionists see it as placing a trade border through the sea between Northern Ireland and mainland Europe. And obviously Unionists feel very strongly that they are part of the UK, and any assumption of a border horrifies them. So there's anxiety around the Northern Ireland Protocol. There's a lot of anxiety as well around that kind of balance of power. I mentioned it's quite slim at the minute between Sinn Féin and the DUP. It's liable to tip into a Sinn Féin led government in the next election. And of course, one of Sinn Féin's big issues is that they would like the reunification of Ireland. So we are likely to see a border poll, a referendum of some sort in the next few years. Obviously, looking at what's going on in Scotland and the rest of the Union, it feels like the Union is about to break up. So there's an anxiety around that in the wider sense of the United Kingdom at the minute. So those issues are in the background, and you may have seen in the international press in April, it tipped over into rioting. So in loyalist Protestant working class areas of Belfast, Derry, and Carrickfergus, there were petrol bombs thrown, there were attacks against the police force, and we had a week of just an awful lot of, it felt like the old days again. It did not feel good here. Buses burnt out, police attacked, and that anxiety is simmering beneath the surface. And of course, the lockdown issues around coronavirus haven't helped at all. People are frustrated to start with. So when I say that it feels tense here, it always feels tense in Belfast, but right now it feels particularly tense. The police helicopter has been over my house for about a month solid, and it's not just me they're watching. I'll stress that it's not me that's being observed. We're all being observed. It feels very tense in Belfast.
But you already kind of touched on some of the really tricky issues here, because you said in the loyalist Protestant working class areas of Belfast, there has been. And already here, we recognize something that is not so often talked about, at least not outside of Northern Ireland, that this conflict is not a religious conflict, not only a religious conflict between Protestants and Catholics, which has very often been framed as or described as, but also entails a lot of other elements. Could you just very, very briefly tell us about how these divisions actually play out in the city of Belfast, or in Northern Ireland as a country?
Yeah, I mean, Belfast is a microcosm of the whole of Northern Ireland, so we still have a lot of segregated housing areas. So there is a peace line in Belfast which divides working class Protestant and Catholic communities. We still have a segregated school system. 90% of our schools are still segregated. And as you mentioned, Carl-Henrik, the issue of class is kind of simmering underneath all of that. More middle class areas wouldn't tend to be segregated along those lines, and the tension that we're seeing at the minute is bubbling up in working class areas, and that's partially because of other factors. And what was terribly disturbing about the riots in April was it was mostly children who orchestrated it. So young men, I think the youngest arrest I think was 13. So these were young boys, and they're frustrated because they come from areas where unemployment is rife, poverty is an enormous issue, and you know, for the last 20 years, we've had a suicide epidemic in Northern Ireland. There are more people who have lost their lives here from suicide in the last 20 years than were victims of the entire 30 years of the Troubles. So there's that dynamic under the surface, and those riots were orchestrated by older paramilitary leaders who can see the vulnerability in those young men. And, you know, it's easy when they step up and say, you know, we'll give you a sense of identity, we'll give you somewhere to vent your frustration. Do what we tell you. They weren't the ones throwing the petrol bombs. They're not the ones getting the criminal records. And I find that terribly, terribly troubling. And it makes me want to ask that those who are in power to think about the bigger picture. You can address the surface level of paramilitary violence. There are bigger societal issues under the surface.
Yeah, and this I think is a lesson that can be learned in Northern Ireland, but also it's saying something of this that is actually generally valid for many of these conflicts, that they are not one issue conflicts, but that there are a lot of different dimensions to it. I took now the opportunity to ask you to add to your description. This is, of course, not only a privilege of me, but also to everyone in this Zoom room out there that is listening to this. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask questions, and I will try to channel them into the discussion as we go along. Now, Iryna, I would like to come to you. Jan just described Northern Ireland as in a constant volatile phase that has been going on for years and decades. Somehow one could describe also Belarus as a kind of an ongoing problematic place, but where things really escalated last year. Could you tell us about what the situation, what led to this escalation and what the situation is right now?
Hello, and thank you for having me here. As we know, the attention span is very high in these days of technology and internet, and Belarus was all over the media and Western media, including in August and September, a little bit of October, and now it seems like it was replaced by some other places which are in trouble. So it seems like maybe nothing is happening. Actually, a lot of things are still happening. So we had the presidential elections on August 9th. Like all the previous elections, those were stolen as well. Unlike the previous elections, this time the society decided that it was enough. The technology really helped to spread the word about the violations and falsifications. And over the night, everybody knew that the elections were completely fraud, which brought thousands of people on the streets. And then every day, every single day since August 9th, there were thousands of people on the streets, and every Sunday for several months we had huge demonstrations, which Minsk hasn't seen ever in this post-Soviet era. Over 100,000 people were taking the streets. Unlike Belfast, it was extremely peaceful. There was no violence. There was those photos coming out from Belarus with people removing their shoes to stand on the bench to see what's going on ahead so that they don't damage the property. The Belarusians are like that. So throughout all these months, the violence came only and solely from the state. and the violence of also unprecedented level. Even though we had political prisoners before, there were people who disappeared, politicians and journalists. We believe they were murdered in the 90s, late 90s, beginning 2000s. But the level to which the violence took this time was completely unexpected and unprecedented. More than 35,000 people were detained or served administrative arrests in unhuman conditions since August. 35,000 people in a country of less than 10 million inhabitants. We have, as of today, 370 political prisoners. Some of them have been in prison since June, even before the elections. Those were the candidates, alternative candidates, eliminated by the government, or it thought so. Some people were arrested just a few days ago. The charges are completely absurd. These are people of all walks of life. One of the most prominent political prisoner who is, she's still in prison, and she is a female flute player. So she's an artistic person. She didn't think of becoming a politician or joining the politics until this summer. She became the symbol of freedom and of will for changes. So she's in prison for several months among those 370 people. And my background is also symbolic. I thought of it because that's exactly what hundreds of people see month after month, day after day, just gray cells of prison. They're not being taken outdoors for real walks. We keep hearing reports that the letters are not being delivered to them. Many of them are denied their right to meet with their family members. And I'm now talking about people who I know personally as well as I don't know personally, but that's just really very, very grim picture. Among those 370 people, we also have 11 journalists and media workers, and also personal friends. So it really comes very close to home when I talk about it. But also from the outside, it looks like, well, you know, demonstrations are over. Lukashenko won again. The regime is consolidating. It's all true. But what is not seen from outside is that the country is on fire. It's underground resistance which continues. The art and culture play tremendous role. We will probably talk about it a bit later, but it's you know, for years independent culture, modern culture and art were somewhat in its own bubble, just dreaming of connecting with the society. And then suddenly now we see how it breached and how it actually became the voice and eyes and expression of emotions and even psychotherapy in some way for the society. The independent media played extremely important role as well. They were marginalized in the mid-90s, and because of internet and because of creativity and because of resilience, we were able to really gain momentum and deliver independent information. And I've been doing it for 20 years now. And it's the first time probably when I could feel and see that every word we write matters, that there is this tremendous demand for independent, objective information when we mattered. And the appreciation of this probably compensated for all the troubles and all the repressions, because basically every day our magazine, as other remaining independent media, is expecting to be blocked. The website can be blocked anytime. We can be arrested anytime. So it's really a lot of pressure. But nevertheless, people do not give up. And I'm talking also about ordinary citizens who started self-organizing during the pandemic when it started. And then it actually helped to self-organize at the level of districts, neighborhoods, and even yards to start doing something for your community, and it continues as well. Mm-hmm. So I would say, just to sum up, that of course many people were forced to flee the country. We have big immigration centers very active now in Vilnius and Warsaw and other countries. Belarusians who live abroad are also extremely active, and it's tremendous support for those of us who are in the country. We also never saw Belarusian diaspora being so active, and it's something also very new for Belarus to see and to feel that there is a nation inside of the country, but also outside of the country. But I would say with all of that, society has changed completely. And even though it looks like the regime is winning now, it's a question of time when it will fall, because there is no way back. After what happened in our heads, there is no way back to how it was before August 2020.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, I think, in drawing the conclusion that Belarus is somehow out of the top spot of the 9 o'clock news and on the front pages of the newspapers. But if you look further, it's clear also that your struggle there is not going unnoticed, even in Western media. But we will talk more, just as you presumed, also about what is the role of art, of culture, of journalism, of education in this whole conundrum. But first I want us to so that we're on the same page and know a little bit about the very different parts. We're spanning basically 3 time zones here between Belfast and Minsk. It's important, I think, to look at the diverse part of this problem as well, and individual part of it, just as well as draw kind of general conclusions. László, in Hungary, people are not being beaten up on the streets. It's not violent in the way and repressive in the way that Iryna just described. However, for 10 years at least, Hungary has also been in the focus of not only Hungarians, but of international media and European media. And in some ways, Hungary has taken the lead, has become a vanguard for a new type of, well, what one wants to call it, we can discuss that, of a liberal democracy or of authoritarianism, or whatever one wants to call it. Could you describe to us what has happened in the last years and what the situation is in Hungary at the moment?
Hi, Henrik. It's a pleasure to take part in this debate. The first debate, as you said, took place in Budapest about 8 or 9 years ago, and now I'm again in Budapest. So I have been in Budapest all my time. You are right. Mr. Orbán, our prime minister, became world famous, and his name is mentioned together with Donald Trump, Erdogan, and all the other guys in the world politics who we don't like. As you all know, Orbán began his political career in the late 80s, early 90s as a liberal politician, supported by George Soros, and later he moved first to the center, then to the right, and now at the moment he ended up in the far right or extreme right, and he feels home in the company of politicians like Salvini, Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, or the AfD. And he's building up something which doesn't exist in my mind, but still he clings to it, the illiberal democracy. And what does this mean? It means he launched a war in the recent years against culture, against all liberal values. First in Hungarian politics, he eroded the rule of law, democratic values, and asserted his grip over institutions such as the electoral system, the media, the courts. And now he started a culture war. Kulturkampf is the real name. It's also in Hungary, we call it with this German expression, Kulturkampf, which is taking place. It means he wants to control everything from the media to education, higher education, from press to theaters, in every field. And slowly this is taking place. It was just about 2 weeks ago, in the late April, that the government passed a law transforming control of 11 Hungarian universities to a series of foundations. These foundations are all run by his allies, and the universities were placed under the control of public foundations, along with the billions of foreign or millions of euros worth of assets, including palace, harbors, mansions, resorts, parks, theaters, clinics, and what you can imagine. And the main point of this foundation-based structure is that the state assets that are to be handed over to these foundations will no longer be considered public capital in the classical sense. Now, of course, everybody regards this as a theft. It means that Orban is ensuring that Fidesz, his party, can maintain important positions, even in the case if he will be defeated next year during the elections. And this, at the moment, we are all suffering under this pandemic, but people actually don't listen to what's happening in the politics. Everybody cares about vaccination, about how many people die. I must say, Hungary has the worst statistics in death in the whole world at the moment. So everybody is occupied with this theme, and the large public didn't notice that what's going on, so that actually half of Hungary has been stolen. So this is the bad news.
Well, Henrik, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, sorry. I have two mute buttons, and thank you, Jan. That's the problem of being too disciplined. What I wanted to say was that it's not only so that half of Hungary has been stolen, it's also so that Hungary is kind of divided into two halves. And you spoke about the upcoming elections, as the next year will be parliamentary elections, and this will be the third, I think, in a row where this majority of Orban's is at stake.
Yes. Yes.
So the question is that for the first time, I think that there's now some kind of idea, at least, of that this election might not go as the previous two. But I would like to come very shortly to this division. Is it really so that Hungary is a divided society? Is it divided on a political level, on a social level? Can you see that? Is it divided between countryside and urban cities? What is this division that one can somehow clearly see?
This division has a long historical tradition. It comes from it started from the late 18th century already, when in Hungary there was no bourgeoisie in the classical sense of the word. And because of this, the countryside was always very important. And the cities, especially Budapest, was inhabited by people who were mostly foreigners. So still in the late 19th century, half of Budapest was German language country. And the country was always suspicious of the city. And later, in the first half of the 20th century, the cities meant they had industry, they had the finance. Most of the Hungarian Jews lived also in the cities. And in the country, they said this is something which is against the old idea of Hungary. They want to go to the West. They are importing ideas which do not belong to the Hungarian heritage. And because of this division is very, very deep. It's not social. I wouldn't say it's social. It's more cultural. It's more cultural. Of course, the present government knows this very well and can play with this division very well. So we arrived to a point where actually marriages have broken up and friendships were broken up just because of this division. So we are, I think, we arrived to a point where nothing can go deeper than this one. So you live in Vienna, Karl-Henrik, and I live in Budapest. It's by car, it's 2.5 hours. But now we feel as if we were living thousands and thousands kilometers away from Vienna.
There are problems in Vienna as well, I can tell you, but we will talk about those a different time. But staying with this, with you for a while, László, you're saying half of the country has been stolen, and one very important part of the description that you just made is, of course, this attack on academic freedom and this attack on the educational system, on the system of higher education. And you were, as I tried to hint at in my introduction, chairing a department at the University for Theatre and Film Art in Budapest. But you resigned. This
Yes.
was one of the acts that you thought would be taking a stand against a development that you couldn't accept. Can you tell us a little bit of what happened at that university?
Oh, yes. Our university, the University for Theatre and Film, it's an old institution, 156 or 57 years old. It's a very esteemed university. Last summer, the Hungarian parliament proposed a bill to change the structure and the working model of this university. And this proposal was preceded by no discussion with the staff of the university. And the bill became law, even though we were protesting, and the students, the faculty and the management were strongly protesting against this. According to this bill, the university is to be managed by a foundation and run by a board of trustees. But neither the faculty nor the management nor the students of the university were consulted at any stage in this process. And the first step this new board took was to strip the democratically elected university senate of most of their decisional powers. So on the 1st September last autumn, the senate and the faculty leaders resigned as a form of protest, and the students, they occupied and blockaded our university. The demands were clear and targeted at the guaranteed autonomy of our university. Shortly afterwards, a new chancellor was introduced. The students didn't let him enter the university. And so he hired an office somewhere outside in an office building. And from there, he took internal and illegal measures, such as switching off the Wi-Fi, closing the main auditorium where the daily assemblies were held, switching off electricity, and so on and so on. And on 1st of October, all the professors of the university began a general strike. The strike meant that we were teaching the students, but we didn't take any salaries. And the blockade meant that no one could enter the university, only the professors, the staff, the management, and the students, no one else. And this lasted 70 days long, with a huge solidarity of whole Budapest, and I can say of the whole Hungary.
Before we come to what the result of that very, very concrete activism, occupying a space and so on, as you say, for 70 days, I think that you have some pictures that you want to show.
Oh, yes, yes.
I think this would be a good moment to do that, and then we could come to the what the result of this protest actually.
Okay, I share. How do I share the?
You share by the green button in the middle.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So now you can see.
Yes, everything is visible.
Okay, so here is the main entrance of the university in September or October. This is how it looked like. These stripes, these are used when something is done, a renovation in the road or roadblocks, but this red and white stripe became a symbol. And now you can see on cars this stripe, or on bicycles and motorcycles, people wear them.
I'm sure that Irina will actually recognize that symbol as well. We'll come to that later.
Yes, of course, because it's also in Belarus, the white and red. But so this is how the blockade, a day of the blockade, every day, this is how the students lived in the main entrance of the university. There they changed every day, and there was a guard. Every second day there was a press release and a press conference in front of the main entrance. Some media were always present, so the few oppositional media which still exist. In September, the students organized a so-called human chain. It meant a chain from the university to the parliament. About 15,000 people, you see, from all generations took part in this chain. Our demands were handed over from man to man, from the university to the parliament. Here is this chain. It was a fantastic afternoon, a nice Sunday afternoon, about 15,000 people. And here it was handed over to some representatives, of course, without any result.
This is the parliament building that we see there in the background.
This is the Hungarian parliament building. The greatest one, I think, in whole Europe. This is the chancellor when he wanted to enter the university and the students didn't let him in. And then on the 23rd October, the day of the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, the students organized a huge demonstration. About 30,000 people took part in it, with torches, concerts. And this is in the evening, so it was a fantastic.
It's clear then from looking at this, you also, when you speak about it, one can hear that you are moved. I would suggest that you click the green button again so that... Yes, that's good. It's clear that even when you speak about it, it's moved, and it creates a kind of solidarity within this group, and it's also a kind of social cohesion here that is happening. But the question is a provocative one. The university is meanwhile not occupied, question mark. the university is now in the hands of the chancellor that we saw that couldn't enter it before. So what has it achieved? What has this protest achieved?
This was the first case that there was a very serious and demonstration against the Orban system. And 2 or 3 years ago, when the Central European University was forced out from Hungary, there were also demonstrations, but it lasted 2 or 3 weeks. But the university wasn't occupied, wasn't blockaded. This was the very first time that Orban and the regime had to face that there is a young generation which doesn't want their rule. Of course, the university now isn't occupied, but in the meantime, in February, over 30 professors, me included, resigned. So we don't have now any post at the university anymore. About 20, 25 members of the management also resigned. And about 150 students, it's a small university of 400 students, about 150 students, as they say, they postponed their studies. But in the meantime, so during the parallel with the blockade, we started working on a program which we called Emergency Exit, whereby we are trying to save the diplomas of all those students who do not want to cooperate with the illegally appointed management of the school. And we founded a society, it's called Free SFA Society. SFA is the name of our university. Free SFA Society to rescue these students. And we are teaching these students. So I'm teaching, also today I had my lessons, and of course we are not an accredited higher educational institution and probably will not become one soon, but we are in close collaboration with 5 universities from abroad, Vienna, Munich, Ludwigsburg, Salzburg, and Warsaw. And they will give diplomas to all these students, and our teaching staff is doing his work, of course, without any salary. But I think this is a fantastic achievement. So we are not only proud of it, but I think the students will get a very, very good diplomas all over Europe. This is a kind of solidarity which hasn't taken place in Hungary for many years.
Yeah, and I think that we come back to the general conclusions one can draw from that. But it's a horrifying story, of course, but with a very encouraging core, where you move on, create other types of alternative forms of education and so on. Jan, I will come back to you very, very soon, but I will take a detour over Belarus before we come back to where we started in Northern Ireland. So in what you said, Iryna, before was that there's no way back. And what László is describing here is describing a way forward, right? As that one creates alternatives to that what is. The question is how sustainable they are and so on. But if it's the case in Belarus that there is no way back, what is this alternative structures that could sustain the protest, that could lead to a sustainable social and political change?
It's a complicated question, of course. And before I get to it, I'll probably refer to your question about divisions. And I was listening to László, recognizing so many things and feeling very strongly for what you've been going through, because we've been through these similar things years ago, but now they repeated this summer in the fall, when also Dozens of professors resigned in the protests against the repressions of the students. Hundreds of students were expelled or arrested. We have a group of student leaders who are in prison now, and many who had to flee the country. So I think when I think about division in Belarus, division between choosing the past or the future. And this is a division line that the society as a whole wants the future and the regime wants to stay in the past. And it's a division between dictatorship and democracy, and the division between conservation and changes. What talking about what can be those structures, there will be different. There are already different structures. What we saw for the first time probably is that the self-organization at different levels, from universities to those neighborhoods, where people for the first time got to know their neighbors in face and name, where they would get together to have a discussion or debate in the yard about the history of Belarus or about the political situation. It never happens. There were like flying lectures, like László just was explaining how they're building these new structures. So there were political scientists and historians and cultural figures and artists who would be invited by these local communities and would come to the yards in the open air settings. They would be drinking tea and discussing those big issues, which we as a society did not address before. So I think it's a good start. So what gives me hope is that now we're talking about really changing the structures, creating this self-organizing structures, rather than thinking who will be the next leader. It's not a question about the leadership, it's a question about how the society wants to see itself and rebuild, reinvent itself, which gives me hope that we might succeed, even if it will take more time than we hoped when we started those protests.
Yeah, László, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, a question to Irina. When all these demonstrations in Belarus took place, we were watching that the women played a huge role. And how do you explain this, as both in Belarus and now also in Russia, the women play a more important role than men?
I'm not sure if it's more or less important. I think that women were always playing a very important role in the opposition structures. They were, before that time, they were not in the front line. So you would usually see men politicians or men oppositions, and the women would be doing a lot of background work, which was actually moving things forward. So it's something that I personally observed a lot, and it was also a lot of debates about it, why we're on the background more than on the front line. So what changed in the summer is that due to different factors, starting from Svetlana Tikhanovskaya replacing her husband who got arrested and becoming the leader of the opposition, of the democratic movement, and transforming from a housewife to an absolutely brilliant public figure. That was the first step. And then there were the three women who became the symbol of the summer. And then the next natural step was that that women took the stage when the men were beaten severely. And still in Belarus, until this time, it was part of the culture that women would not be beaten, that they would not be arrested. Also in 2010, we had several women leaders who were arrested, but overall, they would let women go. If when there was this big roundup of arrests, usually women would not be punished as severely. So I think it's a combination of these two things, or three things, which visualize the role of women for the entire world and made us even more proud of what we were trying to do.
It's nice to see this. So
yeah.
But you said before in your at your first statement actually that culture and art played an enormous role in this protest, also as a kind of psychotherapy, and it suggests to me that it's a kind of identity building which is going on there, or at least strengthening of an identity, or supporting an identity that is perhaps there already. Because at the same time, the culture and art has been very active in so to say, tearing down existing structures, as not for cohesion at all, but for undermining the ruling system. What would you say is the important role here of culture? Is it both, or is one, so to say, the key part of what culture and art and perhaps also critical journalism can do?
Yeah, no, I think that the most important thing that happened, that it suddenly, this independent art just suddenly became popular art, that it left the art galleries and, intellectual spaces which were built over the last couple of decades, and it came to the streets. It went to prisons, because now we have several artists arrested and they are doing art in prison and sending it in letters, and then it's being published by social media and independent media. So there is also a new wave of reflection, a very quick reflection in the form of arts, including sarcastic songs, and it reminds me like medieval culture of jesting, or when you are making fun of something which you don't like. And it's not this high culture you would think, but that's a very important role which it's playing now, that the street art, the poster art, but also the high art. I think that the next step will be when we will be analyzing and reflecting even deeper. This will be different forms of art that will play a more important role. For now, it is popular art of all kind of forms, and it's really tremendous. But another role which we are also discussing a lot is that Belarusians we're not used to express our emotions, and the society has been going through tremendous trauma since August. We are living through this trauma, and we don't know how to express those emotions. And the art actually helps to do it. So that's when I said that this psychotherapy, that's the role. That's when the artists who have this very special souls and who react very strongly to what's going on, who help other Belarusians to express this individual trauma and emotions and society. So I think that's something that we will also be reflecting on a lot. And yes, as I mentioned, of course, the media played an extremely important role, because now there's one strong image which will be flying around in a matter of seconds all over the internet and messengers. So you can't hold it, you can't hide it anymore. And I think that this connecting role of art is also extremely important right now.
Jan, when Iryna talks about Belarus and talks about trauma, talks about art as a possible way to handle that trauma, about when László talks about suddenly neighbors talk to each other and get together, I have the feeling that they're talking about Belfast, they're talking about Northern Ireland. Are they?
Yeah, I guess I have been a community arts facilitator in Northern Ireland for, I guess, 21 years now. And a lot of that work has been cross-community work. So bringing people from the Protestant community into the Catholic community, or vice versa, and learning a little bit about each other's stories and creating something together. And there's a very base level there of just allowing people to sometimes encounter someone from the other side for the very first time, and art creates a space to do that. It's a third space that's not necessarily going to talk about those big divisive issues straight away. It's going to give people a chance to get to know each other on that human level that Iryna's talking about, with neighbours in their gardens and things. So I think that art here does that. The other thing that I think it does, as Iryna has touched upon as well, it gives us an outlet to process trauma. And a lot of people have seen some desperately difficult things in Northern Ireland, and we must be secret Belarusians, because we're not good with our emotions either in Belfast, sometimes, particularly our men. And so these art projects I'm involved in, they give people an outlet to find their voice, to vocalize, to express, to paint or sing or dance what they've been through. And
could you just describe what such an encounter is? What do you do? Just very briefly.
for me as a writer, mostly what I work on is cross-community writing projects. So it might be around something like the theme of identity, where I've just finished a project where a group of older ladies from the Falls and the Shankill met together weekly to share stories around their culture. So, you know, what does a funeral look like in your community? What does it look like in our community? Can we find points of connection rather than points of division? And that sounds very simple, but writing about that, inevitably people go, do you know what? We're actually more alike than we are different. And I guess that is the biggest difference in Northern Ireland. I hear from Laszlo and IRYNA talking about their situations. Yes, we also have a state government that we're extremely frustrated with, but on a base level, we also have kind of very binary divisions within culture itself. So we don't have that groundswell of people on the same side trying to topple or change the big structures at the top. And I think this is the final thing that I think art does is probably the most important. It creates a space between those two binary divisions. It allows people to learn how to think objectively. Like, we were all educated in school systems that only taught us one side of history or one side of politics. And art encourages empathy, it encourages nuance, it encourages people to think objectively and challenge those presumptions. And to me, when I think about Northern Ireland moving forward, we need people who can think critically, who can say, I was brought up in this community, but there are some things about it I don't really agree with. And there are some things in this community that I think are wonderful. And can we forge a middle ground before we even start to think about the corruption and the problems in our governmental structure? So I guess I find this conversation quite saddening and quite difficult, because I feel like we in Northern Ireland are probably years behind where you guys are with these ground level swells of people who can point at something and go, that's wrong, and we want to come together to change it. We're still working on, can we come together to start with? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but when I was in Northern Ireland a couple of times recently, I think I can feel a kind of a change also. You pointed to the fact that there are young people that are at the center of these riots, throwing their Molotov cocktails into running buses and whatever, but being somehow, at least one could think that, being played a little bit from behind by paramilitaries and so on. But if you look at young people in general, or at least the young people that I met, there's another forward-looking air around them somehow, as that they are determined not to get stuck in those old traumas or in those old conflicts, but actually, and not also not leaving Northern Ireland to go somewhere else, but to build something there, a perfectly normal life, as Romanians would have said 30 years ago or so.
Yeah, I think in some levels you're right, Carl Henrik, and in some levels I fundamentally disagree with you. There are very inspirational young people who are determined to stay and change things. They tend to be from middle class backgrounds. They tend to be from places where they're not worrying about where they're going to find a job or the state of their housing or whether they're going to be, you know, attacked when they leave their homes. When you have that feeling of not feeling safe, of not having an identity, of not feeling like you have a future, it's really hard to be inspirational sometimes. And that's where the paramilitary groups tend to sweep in, and they can see vulnerability in our young people and they manipulate that. And it's desperately, desperately frustrating. I've been working with a Northern Irish contemporary playwright called David Ireland for the last wee while. He's one of our kind of most established playwrights at the minute. And he grew up in a loyalist housing estate, very working class area. And the only reason that he didn't get involved in the paramilitaries was because he stumbled into a drama group. And he's gone on to be an award-winning playwright, whereas most of the kids he went to school with have got caught up in this cycle of violence and poverty. And so I guess that's why I really believe in community arts. And our government, Laszlo, are probably a little bit more subtle than urban. So they are also systematically undermining the arts infrastructure of Northern Ireland, but it's through reducing funding, it's through minimalizing what we do, so they make it seem small and insignificant when actually it has played a massive part in the peace and reconciliation process. So I think their objectives are probably just as sinister, but they go about it in a slightly more kind of subtle way sometimes.
Let me ask you one more question, Jan, that has to do with writing. And when you describe the potential kind of soothing and objectifying, as in a positive sense, or making things possible to see intersubjectively, perhaps rather than objectively, then art gets this kind of healing function and a role. But at the same time, high art is very often not that, because it becomes too one-dimensional. It becomes too much of a of painting things a little bit too pink, perhaps, right? And you don't do that at all in your books. As in Firestarters, it's there. I mean, it's the different perspectives are there, but it's not so to say making the conflict easy somehow. And the same thing in Children's Children. The title says a little bit what it's about, is that ideas and traumas and conflicts are transferred through generations as well. But you don't do that. Do you see that as a challenge, as a not to become too healing?
Yeah, two things I'd like to say about that, Carl-Henrik. First of all, as an artist, I always want to begin from a position of treating the people and the subjects I write about with respect and dignity. I have to see that they're human beings first, and that they are of worth and value. And so when I write about these situations, which are desperately difficult and complex and problematic, I want to make sure that I also bring up the humanity in the people I'm writing about. Particularly the loyalist community here have been very satirized and mocked. And it's not fair. I mean, sometimes they set themselves up to be satirized and mocked in what they do, but I have to see them as full human beings and write about all of that. And the other thing is that I need to see myself as complicit in the problem. And I think sometimes artists remove themselves, and we have to have a certain amount of distance to write about things. But you know, a thing I'm realizing at the minute is I was 18 when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. That was 23 years ago. I've been an adult for 23 years. The frustrations I have with Northern Ireland, the lack of integrated education, the peace lines, the paramilitary violence, which is still endemic, I should have done more about that. I should have been doing what you guys are doing so well in Belarus and Hungary, protesting and petitioning and talking more about it. And when you place yourself as complicit within the problem, I think it gives you a very different way of writing about it. Yeah, I find that quite difficult, actually. It makes me think about what I do next with my writing and engagement, because I don't want another 23 years of this in Northern Ireland. I want us to be further down the road.
A fabulous answer. I've asked that question many times, actually, and I don't think that I ever got such a good answer. I would like at this stage to get some of the questions from the audience into this as well. And the first one would then go to you, László. Yesterday, when the conference opened, Basil Karski, in his opening speech, was referring to a kind of quid pro quo situation in Russia, where Putin are, so to say, delivering certain things in order to keep allegiances and so on. Is this the same situation that Orban is doing in Hungary, also with this creation of the foundations that you described earlier?
I think something similar is taking place in Hungary. Actually, when in Russia, the gender studies were prohibited at the universities. Next week, also in Hungary, all the gender studies were prohibited at Hungarian universities. And also the foundations system is quite similar to that, what's happening in Russia. Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Jan, please.
I don't know if this has appeared in your international news yet, but Johnson's government is starting to do something similar in the UK. So arts funding to universities has been absolutely slashed. So I think the similar things are beginning to happen with us in the UK as well.
Yeah, I think that I mean what this discussion has shown so far is that there are so many similarities between these apparently very different situations, and of course there are differences as well, and one shouldn't think that one understands this by just making a little bit of comparisons. But another question coming from the audience would be, and I would pose, this is for all of you, but I would pose that to you, Iryna. When it comes to this kind of cultural solidarity that you described somehow, and that also that László described before, you described that those in national terms, that Belarusians are so to say gathering on streets and backyards and in neighborhoods and so on, and László described the same. However, we're all not living only in nation states, we're living in a larger context. What does a kind of European solidarity mean for the cause in Belarus, to take this as the first example? Do you care if there's support from cultural activists or cultural actors, or even other parts of societies in Europe, or do you have to deal with it yourself?
No, of course we care, and it matters a lot. Just to feel that we are not alone in this struggle, given that the world is not the best place right now. There are so many problems and so many big challenges that it's very hard to find a happy place on the planet now. So it's extremely important, especially for those who are in prison or who suffered the violence, that their victim, what their sacrifice actually was not for nothing, because we haven't yet achieved the political change. So we are still on the way, and we don't know how long this way will be and how many other sacrifices we will have to have. So therefore, it's very important that there is a feeling of solidarity, that especially at the cultural level, there is not so much that politicians can do. I mean, I think there is also understanding that it's our fight. We have to fight it and win it. So we don't put the responsibility on some external forces. So we know that we must push until we achieve something, but to feel that the values matter, that what we stand for matters, that those are not empty words when we talk about freedom and democracy and human rights and independence and cultural rights, that this is all having a meaning. That's very important. But of course, also there is a practical level to it. We see a lot of solidarity, like László said, with students who were expelled in Belarus, and now they are continuing their studies in Lithuania, Ukraine, and Warsaw, and other countries. That's very important. The same for artists. There are communities now, Belarusian independent artists in Vilnius, in Kyiv, and other places, and there are local artists who are supporting them and who actually create joint projects. So I actually think that with all the hardships of what we are going through, there are also so many new things and openings, and this cross-border solidarity and feeling of belonging to a bigger community and not just our local ones, as we used to be very close-minded, I would say, and kind of sitting in our box and fighting our fight. Now we feel that we're actually part of something larger. And I think that that's of tremendous importance from all the points of view.
László, in Hungary, this question has, of course, also been on the agenda for a long time. When during these 70 days at the Theatre and Film Art University, there were several international petitions. Big Hollywood actors signed these, and there was a large one had the feeling it was a large international community of intellectuals and artists and whatever that supported the thing. At the same time, these measures and petitions or support are, of course, mostly symbolical. Not what Iryna talked about then, receiving students but a lot of these other things are symbolical. Is that still helpful, or do you see other that there has to be some other way of organizing this kind of let's say European solidarity to start with?
Well, this huge solidarity, it was I would say mentally helpful, but otherwise it didn't help. And if I look back on the closure of the Central European University, this was the first university closure since the Second World War in Europe. And the European Union tried to take measures against it and didn't succeed, though we are a member of the European Union. And on the other hand, we could build this kind of free SFM movement with the help of foreign universities because we are in the European Union. That's a great possibility for us. But on the other hand, you all know what's going on in Brussels. Orban cannot be stopped. So whatever he wants, he does it. And there is one thing I will never forgive him in my life, that he destroyed the future of a whole young generation. And thousands and 10,000 and about 500,000 young Hungarians left Hungary, which is a disaster. It's a tragedy. It's a national tragedy in my eyes. And so I don't have any illusions, I must say.
This is, of course, the other side of what Iryna described earlier with cross-border support, for example, with students going to many Belarusians are meanwhile in Poland, for example. Poland is very often regarded as a country that don't take any strangers or foreigners, but there are a lot of Ukrainians, there are a lot of Belarusians in Poland right now. And the problem is, of course, that when this also attracts the most gifted, the most talented, the most creative, it contributes to the brain drain, which is already a problem in this. So I don't think that anyone has illusions here, to be honest. Hungarians are famous for their not only melancholy, but also for their pessimism. However, for a while, it seemed that some kind of European embeddedness worked in Northern Ireland, didn't it, Jan? That the whole foundation for the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement was the fact that you could be both British and Irish because you were European. I think that you yourself have double passports, for example, which is one result of that, at least in many cases, it's a result of that. And now exactly this breakout of this European context creates the new problems. Do you see it in that way as well?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about this a lot recently. I don't know, folks here might not know, I'm a magical realist. I write within the magical realism tradition, and I've been thinking about Northern Ireland quite a lot recently as a magical realist concept. To be honest, the Good Friday Agreement is the ultimate suspension of disbelief. You know, you have basically a square peg and a round hole, and we all, for the last 23 years, have pretended that you can stick the two things together, that, you know, there can be half the population wanting this and half the population wanting this, completely different thing, and we can muddle along for 23 years gloriously. And in a way that involves a little bit of fantastical thinking, and it involves all of those very European concepts of being able to have a multiplicity of identities, being able to have a fusion of different cultures coming through and celebrate it and championed. And I personally, possibly because I'm a magical realist, love that and could do with lots more of it. I think it would be wonderful to live in a magical realist state. But what Brexit has done is say, end of the fantasy, guys, pick a side. What side are you on? Are you a square peg or a round hole? Are you, do you feel Irish or do you feel British? And that it feels like the end of the dream in a way. And I don't really know where we go from here. I mean, the only thing that I can think about is an enormous amount of investment in what we've been talking about tonight, reteaching people how to think. How do you imagine? How do you be able to believe in impossible concepts? Because we are, as a small place, an impossible concept. We will not be able to exist as Northern Ireland by itself. We're just too tiny. And both, if the border poll's imminent, if we go with a United Ireland, half the people here will be really angry. If we, keep in the UK, half the people are going to be really angry. We need something fantastical. You can quote me on that. I don't think I'm going to run for government on a policy of fantasy, but that's really what we need in Northern Ireland.
I will do that immediately, Jan, and I will throw this quote at IRYNA. Don't you need something fantastical as well?
I think we've done something fantastical this year, something that we dreamed of, imagined, but we could not have it, and we are living this dream. So I think that suddenly we stopped being so practical, and there was this question about like this kind of social contract with Putin and Orban doing this. Lukashenko tried to do it and was quite successful for a long time. But now it's not about this anymore. It's about a dream. It's about the country we imagine existing. And it was like, we were puzzled because this white, red, white flag was a symbol of the democratic opposition, but was completely marginalized. And most of the people until August didn't really have any sentiment to it. And then overnight, suddenly everyone has a flag in his or her hands. And we were joking that probably in the attics we all had the flag. So it's really like a dream coming true. So it's a question whether we will be able to live this fantasy and make it into reality. But just the possibility of touching it a little bit, of allowing ourselves to believe that we can make it, and that we have it somewhere deep in our souls and hearts. We always had it, and now it's shared. I think that this is already amazing in itself.
László, let's leave the realm of magic realism and fantasy for a while, or to end with, and go for pure realism in Hungary. What are your predictions for the elections next year? Is there a real chance for change?
Well, as for dreams, we are living here in a bad dream, and we hope we will wake up next May when the elections will take part. And I think there is now a real chance of voting out this government. And of course, the present government will do everything to make their work hard, because all these foundations which are now built up, they are in the hand of Fidesz. And if the opposition wins next year, which is very possible, they won't have anything in their hands. So the half of Hungary is a shadow state. So that will be the real hard task, how to take it back. So
even if you wake up from a nightmare, you will have to deal with reality then.
Yes, reality will be very, very difficult. It will be very difficult.
Thank you, all of you. We've been doing this for a little bit longer than we planned, but not too much. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I hope the audience did as well. And I'm really glad that we could add to this already very multifaceted conference, Geteilte Heimaten, in Dresden, this European context from 3 different corners of this continent. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you in real very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.